Good morning to you, Lagos, and thank you very much for joining us here on Smooth 98.1. We're in time for Freshly Pressed 98.1, where we'll give you detailed analysis of our newspaper stories this morning. And joining Fulu and myself, Valentine, we have in the studio our analysts. We have Bolaho, Mr. G Quest on Twitter. Good morning, Bolaho.
Morning, Valentine.
Good
Morning,
morning.
Lagos.
Welcome. And Divo Okore. Good morning.
Good morning, Lagos. A cool, good governance.
Right, we like
Nice.
that. Now, Lagos and the rest of the world, because we know you're all listening from different parts of the world, you can communicate with us here in the studio by simply sending in a WhatsApp message to us. That's on 0809 4440981. You can also tweet at us. Just use that hashtag freshlypressed981. Once you do that, we can read out your messages over the airwaves. And don't forget that we are streaming live on YouTube. So if you want to watch us and comment at the same time, you can go to youtube.com/smooth981FM Lagos.
Let's start with this first story from Daily Times newspaper. Buhari speaks with slain Hawa Liman's family as ICRC expresses sadness. So in this report, the president, Muhammad Buhari, has spoken with Muhammad Liman, who's the father of Hawa Liman. That's the International Committee of the Red Cross midwife who was slain by Boko Haram terrorists. Yesterday, we heard about this story before, and it was really heartbreaking. I mean, how does the president's comment and message to both the ICRC and the family bring succor and some sort of confidence that the country would fulfill the respect the citizens, aid workers who come into the country?
Um, I don't know. These are the issues. It's a very, very, very sad one, and you don't know whether you can express your views on good or bad governance in this matter. Um, the president speaking to the parents of the slain aid worker. For those who don't know, she was a 24-year-old nurse working with the 20 parents who loses their own ward, especially in such a dastard manner. However, there are real issues involved here. Because we don't want to just lie on the sentiment. There was an outrage because Boko Haram had taken, that was the West African region of, they call themselves the West African region of ISIS. They had done this kidnap in Ran and Borno states in March, as far as March, and had kept about 4 ladies, including the Dapchi girl, Shabu. They had made these threats and trying to strong arm the government in really, and when the government, in quotes, did not respond, the first lady was killed in September, followed by the threat that came for Hawa and also the third lady. So this October, they carried out the threats, and we did hear that against every negotiation that was made, they carried out the execution. Now, the third lady, they've said they're going to enslave her alongside Leah Shagu, that's the Dapchi girl, until they get what they're looking for. Now, the United Nations has also reacted vehemently that such workers should be protected wherever. And this is the part that it begins to get bad. The reportage that goes out is that there are war-torn areas within Nigeria. This is against the report that we keep hearing that everything is under control. Secondly, the BBOG, that's to Bring Back Our Girls, went on a street protest in Abuja demanding for a quicker resolution of the issues from government for all the people who had been kidnapped or slain in this matter. CAN was responding as well. The Islamic Supreme Council also was praying for the repose of the soul. But you see, at this time, as we go towards elections, we need to start asking questions about what is the real state of affairs. We need to hear from the government. I need to see more, what I call it, pragmatic steps, starting from the presidency, who is the commander-in-chief, regarding some of these areas that they've been trying to manage the information.
Okay, Devo, I have a couple of questions because we do know it is a highly sensitive area. It does deal with security, and we also know that it's not just our federal government that's involved. We know that there are international communities as well, international bodies that are involved in the negotiations. When we ask for information, what sort of information do we want? What sort of information could be helpful to the general public that would not put further lives at risk?
Well, the truth is, like I mentioned, if the terrorists are able to make such demands and carry them out, it questions the claim that the government says that they are in control.
What were the specific demands?
Their demands were basically money. I mean, we also know that at the bottom of
Do we know that that's all that they did?
that's the highest, even though there's some stories going about that the aid workers were kidnapped because they were apostates, which has a religious side to it, and that they had left the cause, and that because they were as long as they were working for the Red Cross represents an anti position from them. But you see, these are all matters that have no basis within the Democratic Republic. I mean, sorry, within the Republic of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. We have a constitution. No one can usurp the freedom of associations that anyone has. That said, the information management should not trump the ability of people to understand the truth. There are local governments, which we know, and if you understand, if they're negotiating with them, that means they're aware of their locations. They're aware where they're camped. They're aware already there are two factions.
Not necessarily, but I mean, I understand what you mean from coming from the angle of having informants who would give them all the necessary information, but you know that the way they operate, they don't necessarily reveal those sensitive details. Because if they did, if they knew, what's stopping them from capturing this?
Well, because the girls would be executed on the spot. That's exactly what's stopping them from
it's
going
a thin line, and I know it's never easy for government.
Which is why I just wanted us to clarify.
Yes. However, at the end of the day, how long can we continue in this, how would I call it, this hijacking of our sovereignty from those who do not deserve anything better than justice?
Thank you very much, Devo, for looking into that. From this day newspaper, I'll go next to this really dramatic story about Fayashe. He honored the invitation by the EFCC over corruption allegations. He went in the company of the Minister of Aviation, Femi Fani-Kayode, three of his lawyers, including Mike Ozekome, and the River State Governor, Nyesom Wike. He appeared at the EFCC office at exactly 12:59 p.m. with a T-shirt that had the bold inscription written on it, EFCC, I am here. Bolaho.
Oh, you have to give Fayashe the credit anyway for his boldness and his and his sense of humor as well, even though after being out of office as well. So it tells a lot about the man himself. He's been called the Rocco of exactly Iroko or the Rock, of Ekiti State or so. But when we look at the situation, we just have to look at it. We've been talking about this story for so long, since July, when EFCC came out with the stories that they're waiting for him and waiting for the immunity to be over. This was around July when that statement was released on Twitter. Tweets, So and now he also told them that he was going nowhere and he was going to confront them, and that there shouldn't be any cause for alarm anyway. And he's kept to his words. It's just literally just appeared and said, "Here I am. Do whatever you want to do. Anyway, if you have any charges against me, you should throw it at me." But I think you have to point out as well that we have to be careful that when we look at EFCC, they're supposed to be an independent body. We're not supposed to be seeing a lot of all these charges and indiscriminate tweets that are going around, and it seems as if it's always going towards the opposition party as well. So what we find out is Fayashe is actually getting a lot of support from the people, or some sectors of the people, feeling as if it's actually a witch hunt. Well, let's wait and see what happens anyway, what the outcome of the investigation will be, or the interrogation will be. Anyway, we look forward to seeing what the outcome of that will be.
All right, we'll watch and see. Devo, I'll come to you for this next story from Guardian newspaper. Senate in rowdy session over alleged $3.8 billion subsidy funds. According to this report, they said the sitting of the Senate yesterday was in an uproar following a resolution to probe operations of an alleged $3.8 billion fuel subsidy under recovery fund by the Nigerian Petroleum Corporation. If we recall, this came into play because they're trying to check the increase oil price that has an effect, a knock-on effect on the price of imported fuel or petrol, and this costs of the landing cost is largely borne by the NNPC. And according to this story, it said the control of these funds, or the issuance of these funds, is under the authority of just two executives of the NNPC. And when the Senate asked for a complete report and sort of an audit, it has been shrouded in secrecy. Nobody's revealing any detail.
Yeah,
What's your take on
so
this story?
everything is still at an allegation at this point. And what are we talking about? $3.8 billion subsidy payment, which if we put in Naira, my calculator will not have enough space to cover. And we understand where subsidy payments go. But the fundamentals are clear. Nigeria is selling fuel to its citizens far below the cost price. And if you convert dollar, you will understand that, and you will know that someone is bearing cost. And that was why at some point the major marketers had to leave the market, because not only were they owed, but they could not afford to continue if they were not going to be paid the difference. Now, government has borne this burden for some time. We've understood that they've done some swap deals in terms of take our crude, bring it back processed. But at the end of the day, who pays for that cost? The NNPC has not been as straightforward as they should. And the committee, Biodun Olujimin as the minority leader representing the PDP, raised this observation within the Senate yesterday and said that there was an alleged funding line that was used to offset this bill, which was being managed, as you said, by only two people. That's the GMD and GED Finance of NNPC. And this was not known to the Senate, meaning appropriation was not done. So she said that this looks illegal and it must be brought to the attention of the Senate, and that the committee overseeing the downstream sector should look into this. But at the point of saying this, Mr. Ndume now contributed that he fears that the committee must have been compromised in the cause of duty if they had not raised this in the first place, which he has a strong point too. How come I'm not hearing this from the quarters it should have been in? And then the committee chair himself, Kabiru Marfa, objected violently and was saying that it was not true, that NNPC had called these accusations false, and that Ndume should apologize. Then Saraki stepped in and said that it should be looked into, and asked the majority leader, Ahmad Lawal, to look into the matter, which he declined. And Saraki reminded him, my friend, you are the majority leader. You must carry the responsibility. Now, the truth is this is all a bunch of hoobaloo until we find out the facts.
Thank you.
I hope the truth comes out.
We hope so.
Thank you so much for that, Devo. Let's move on to this next story, Golahan, from the Punch newspaper. Nigeria and others will gain from U.S.-China trade war. Now, we know that they've been at loggerheads. They've been imposing fines back and forth. And there's a senior executive of a particular bank working out of China that has said that it just might boost imports from African countries, particularly Kenya and Nigeria, noting that Kenya's trade with China actually grew about 59% in 4 years leading up to 2017 to a total of about $5.2 billion. There are also criticisms, but it's very curious. I'm curious. What do you make of the development so far?
Well, when we look at with the trade war that is currently going on, of course, somebody is bound to benefit from it, and it also depends on who's actually in the right position or who's positioning themselves to benefit from the situation. Of course, when we know China and America are the two largest economies of the world or so, yeah. And so of course when there's a lot of issues and there's a lot of trade between China and America, the situation is being that there's a trade imbalance between China and America, and that's the reason why you are having America coming up with a lot of sanctions against imports coming from China. So when we look at this article, what the article is actually saying is that since there's this trade war going on, of course China will be seeking other partners to trade with, and there's a possibility of Nigeria and other African countries benefiting from it. But when we're looking at it, right now at the moment, China is actually, I think, Nigeria's second largest trade partner, if we look at it. And of course, if the situation happens as well, we stand to benefit a lot from it. But the only way we can benefit from it is actually positioning ourselves, ensuring that we're not getting ripped off or losing from trade deals as well. Because when we look at it, we have a lot of situations where a lot of Chinese products are actually coming into the country, but then not a lot is being exported, or even if we're doing a lot of exports, we're not doing a lot of finished product. So we should actually be looking at value adding to whatever we're going to be exporting out to China, rather than actually exporting our commodities, which we're currently doing at the moment. And we find out that in a lot of cases as well, rather than Nigerians being the exporters of this product, you find out that it's actually the Chinese that are actually coming into the country to do the trade in the country, source the materials and export themselves. So invariably, Nigeria is not benefiting much. The people and the environment are not really benefiting much. But the one thing I'd also like to point out that this article also mentions is the debt that is looming as well too. China is lending quite a lot to African countries, and we have to be mindful of that debt.
Thank you very much for that, Walaho. I'll go through some of the messages very quickly before we move on to our next set of stories. This one is in from Mudukwe Azizat, who says, the painful end to this EFCC and fire saga is that they will do a shoddy job by not being able to prove any of the allegations of corruption against him, and then the dude will come back smelling nicer than Gucci perfume with more drama than ever. That is the concern, but thank you for sending that in. Ken, meanwhile, sends in a message saying, God bless the soul of Hawa, may she rest in peace.
Amen.
Was a tough call for the government to pay ransom and release some ISWAP commanders in custody, because last time they were paid for the release of kidnapped girls, attacks increased and more lives were lost. So a rescue mission also would have been a suicide mission. So it was a tough call. While we got this in from Chris saying Nigeria is also earning more from higher crude oil prices, for crying out loud. So what is at stake here is transparency. If the government uses part of the increased earnings to subsidize fuel imports, all that needs to be done is to be open with the figures. What's so difficult in that?
All right, so let's move on to this next story from Vanguard newspaper. On mobile money, telcos push aggressively for payment banking services license. So telecommunication companies, Devo, in Nigeria, are not leaving any stone unturned in their quest to play in the mobile money service, in the mobile money space. They said, although telcos say that their sole purpose of seeking formal participation in the market segment is not purely commercial, rather a response to government quest to deepen financial literacy in the country. As a means to inform our listeners, mobile money allows customers to transfer or receive money to wallets across all telecoms networks. And they're arguing, based on what the financial sectors have said have been a very massive increase in revenues that have been generated over those transactions, mobile money transactions, in a few months. They're saying, the telcos are saying that we are not banks, we're service providers. But how do you see this playing out? If we establish a relationship between the telcos and the banks and see how there's a cross-reference, adapt a system where they both work together, do you not see this playing out better to favor everyone?
Yes, 16 at a transaction value of about 50 billion. It has risen to about 65.3 trillion transactions in 2018 half year alone. So the wave of e-payment channels, transactions, is inevitable.
Yes.
Now the central bank has seen this growth, and the mobile money use via the telcos their argument has simply been that it's a service provision, because from a telco point of view, it's just a service. Currency in terms of e-channels, you've heard of Bitcoin, you've heard of people being able to make transactions online.
Yes.
You've heard of these days, many people hardly go to the bank because of all the e-payment channels available, which increases transaction value as well as efficiency. Now, the banks have pushed back to some extent, starting from the point that when Sanusi created policies that were to put back of these mobile money processes. However, the execution is not as easy, because they're required to drive this forward, and they've said that telcos may diminish their sense of retail banking and possibly drive them out of the market. Although some have argued that the fight is between your
to about 11.28% year on year in September of 2018, and this is attributable to food price increase. Now, food price increase factors, we've been looking at increased flooding, or looking at insecurity, a number of issues. What are your thoughts on this story?
Well, I'd like to start by saying that if you're a family man and usually someone else does the shopping, never attempt to actually go shopping with whoever is doing the shopping, because of course there'll be no justification for demanding you wouldn't actually have any excuse for not actually adding more money to the food allowances or so.
Yes.
Because
It's
when we
expensive.
when we look at situation of things, prices of food is going up. It's always expensive. From the statistics released yesterday by the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, anyway, we're looking at food prices going up year on year from 13.16% to 13.31%. And it also mentions quite a lot of food items have increased over the year. And we're looking at, potatoes, yams, fish, bread. I think it was just a few months ago that we were actually talking about wheat, price of wheat going up, and that translates into the bakeries talking about a price increase. In fact, when we're looking at it anyway, even if without the price increase as well, items are shrinking. And when I remember last as well, I went to the bakery to buy bread. Look at the size of the bread I was getting
really
a few
about
months ago, and
value
now
for
it's
what
about
you're
getting
getting as
value.
well.
Yes, you're not getting that anymore. So of course, what this translates to is everything is going up, and when the prices go up, what the government does or the CBN tends to do is obviously looking at how to stem or reduce inflation, or just try and make sure that prices are moderating. Would they do this? The only way they can do this is by increasing the interest rate. And so there's been a lot of clamor that the rates might go up, and the reason rates might go up because of what's going on in US, what's also going on as well too with the 2019 elections. Normally when we're going towards an election year or towards an election, you tend to have a lot more spending going on, so there's a lot more money in the system.
Yeah.
So of course the government has to try and moderate this.
Okay.
And we all should just embrace ourselves.
Pressure.
Brace ourselves leading up to 2019.
Yes.
Let's see if hopefully it will stabilize after
Yes.
that, as everything else. Speaking of stability, finally, the National Assembly have approved INEC's 242 billion naira election budget, but it's not without its own set of issues. Devo, even though this day newspaper is reporting, it does mention a few interesting things. First of all, we were told earlier this week, and we're reminding you now, Lagos and the rest of the world, that the legislator has insisted that the source of funding for the budget will moved over from 500 billion that was approved for the special intervention program in the 2018 budget instead of from the National Assembly's special project votes, which was what the president had requested. Now there are about 1,000 something special project votes, just for people to know. We still don't know what those special projects are, but also what is very interesting to note is some of the adjustments that were made within this budget. So the police in the original proposal were earmarked 30 billion naira. The Senate approved 27.341 billion. They also reduced the amount that was earmarked for the DSS from about just over 12 billion to just over 10 billion. All of this was moved over to the Office of the National Security Advisor, which has now jerked up that budget to about 9.4 billion, which is interesting for the Office of the National Advisor. Anyways, your thoughts on this, Devo, and what this sort of movement means, considering that it's just one individual. And the last time we really had any major news coming out of the Office of the National Security Advisor, it was not very good news, was it?
Well, I am not really bothered about who and who gets it, because at the end of the day, this government has been heavy on budget appropriation. However, there is an issue here. Now, finally, the Senate had resolved the impasse of whether INEC will get its budget for the election upcoming, and it's coming rather late. That's another issue entirely on its own. But they haven't gotten it in full, because even though the Senate did pass the budget, there is a fault line as to where this money is going to come from.
Yeah.
So, at what point will the presidency agree? At what point will the Senate cave in? They're saying it should come from the 500 billion special intervention funds. That's what they've used for the Empower and the cash for
the conditional cash transfer, the feeding programs,
initiatives.
Yes.
Now the presidency is saying no, it should come from your special projects. Now these special projects, we do know what they are. Those are the constituency projects that each of the National Assembly members has projected that each of their regions should get. So
But what are those constituency projects?
well, they say in some cases erosion, borehole, roads,
Borehole
etc.
for
and co.
billions.
Now,
Okay.
they claim that is the reason they're there, to defend the interest of their own people, and they believe that they are the ones that carry national interests versus the presidency, who has their own federal mandates. Well, in most cases, it should actually be the executive that carry that mandate. However, we await to see how long this impasse is going to take, because I know the presidency is not going to give into this easily. So this portends the real challenge for the nation. I feel for INEC because if they get their money late, it means execution will be poor and inefficient, despite the fact that all the sums of money were made available, which opens a window for inefficiency of appropriation, which is called corruption.
Yes. Thank you very much for that, Devo. We've got to move speedily on to the final story. Speaking of corruption, let's control the flow of illicit funds. For years and years, not just in Africa but across the world, the flow of illicit funds have been sought to be stemmed by any responsible government. Now, Nigeria is calling for the elimination of the safe havens for stolen assets. This is via the ambassador and our representative at the United Nations, Ambassador Tijani Bande. He made this appeal at New York, saying that it is important that safe havens that create incentives for the transfer of stolen assets and illicit financial flows abroad are eliminated. I feel that he was pointing directly at Switzerland there, but what are your thoughts on this one?
Well, this is a feel-good story at the end of the day. The representative of Nigeria's representative to the United Nations, Tijani Bande, said it, and he said it at the Sustainable Development and the Economic and Financial Committee at the UN General Assembly. So, of course, when you talk about sustainable development, he had to chip it in as well, so that when we're talking about sustainable development, of course, you need to look at situations to safe havens, and that also aids the development of those other nations rather than actually developing our country. So when we're talking about sustainable development, we should be looking at ways where those places where those funds are hidden are barred or eliminated, so that, of course, the money can be used judiciously in their respective countries or so. And so it's a valid statement that is made, and of course it's pointing fingers at a lot of government, a lot of countries. We're talking about so many countries, UK, Switzerland, and so many other countries as well. So we can only hope that they come up with policies to ensure that most of these safe havens are minimized or eliminated.
Thank you very much for that. We'll round up with a few messages up on our WhatsApp.
From IK, it says, on the subsidy claims, the issue is that the daily consumption volumes is grossly overstated. Therein lies the fraud.
All right. Well, Hendrik sends in this one saying, the issue with mobile banking for me, it's about who the regulator will be. Can the CBN actually oversee the financial transactions done using mobile money platforms, or will that go to the NCC? Because at the end of the day, it needs to be traceable, transparent, and accountable.
Valid point.
Very interesting. And let's see, still more messages are coming through.
Shola says, my dear, if telcos have that license, all banks are dead. Some telco customers alone are more than customers of all banks put together.
Thank you very much. Well, up on our live stream, we have Jay Lu saying, guys, Nigerian banks have ignored the retail customer forever. So it is their turn to lose retail business to the telcos. As well as Henry Aluede up on our live stream, who says, the question, talking about petrol and subsidy, is why are we still importing fuel? We can buy and maintain private jets, but not refineries.
That question
Priorities.
is long term.
Lagos. Thank you so very much for to the analyst who came into the studio to share the detailed analysis on the stories. Devo Korea at Devo Korea on Twitter, at Mr. G Quest, that's Bolaho, on all social media platforms. Lagos, coming up next, we have a spirited discussion and we talk about the march from yesterday, Nigeria's march, Nigeria's win.
Yes.
That's at
Namibia.
8:15.
I'm preparing for South Africa.
Inside of the locker room. Good morning.
People don't report South African news.
Sorry?
People don't report South African news.